introduction. My name is Upi. I was going to do a whole intro, but I won't because he's already said everything. So I will introduce you to the three people that I'm joined with today. So we have Director of Executive Search firm Halsey Keetch, Caroline Keetch. We have Hada from Talent Director at Fidelity, and Jinder, VP in Talent Acquisition from BlackRock. And today we're going to look at an issue that's probably quite close to pretty much everyone, I'm assuming, in this room, the talent challenges that we face as an industry to creating truly cognitively diverse teams. And it's also worth mentioning that diversity means many things to many people, so we're talking this at kind of like an overarching level. And we wanted to make the conversation here really practical. So rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of where we're seeing challenges and this and kind of hashing that out, I'm going to skip that bit and I'm going to go through that with you quickly so we can get to the real gems from this esteemed panelist. And actually, what are these people doing in their own organizations? What is the best practice that we can learn and share between us today? So, as a group, collectively, we've seen challenges across a number of factors. So firstly, for external parties like myself and Caroline, and also for internal recruitment teams like the one that Jinder leads, the challenge is the lack of diverse candidates at the most senior levels in the industry. Secondly, from those that are there at the most senior levels, the population size of that talent pool is incredibly small. And while there are many brilliant initiatives happening specifically to readdress this balance at the graduate level and the incoming level and talent attraction to people to the industry, we won't see the fruit of that labor for many years, unfortunately. Thirdly, as Hannah will detail, for talent to thrive, we need inclusive cultures that retain and engage everyone. You may have heard me say this before, you may have heard this before, but diversity is a fact. So it's a goal, it's a number, it's a metric, it can be measured. We can lift it up, we can lift it down, we can bring people into the organization. It's literally what are we looking to measure on that certain day, that certain time. So that's our starting point, but it's not our end goal. Inclusion is an act. We have to, for inclusion to happen, it's a verb. It's not a noun. You don't call yourself an ally or inclusive. You actually have to do something to go out there and be inclusive. And what we really want to get to is we want to get to cultures of belonging, and that's a feeling. That's where people feel they are psychologically safe in their organizations. Employees feel seen and heard and valued. There's space for them to challenge up and down. There's space for learning to happen and being pushed at all times in terms of stretch assignments. And ultimately, it's a place where everyone thrives. So, following on from kind of looking at it from that perspective, I would really love for you, Jinder, to share some of the brilliant ways that you and your colleagues at BlackRock are building truly diverse teams.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. So one of the first things that we do, all recruiters have metrics around diversity for candidate slates. So globally, we would look at gender diversity, with the exception of the US, where we also look at minority representation, so Black and Latinx representation. One of the key things that we're also really trying to drive is diversity in interview panels. Taking that, we all know that diverse teams produce better outcomes. So really applying that to a hiring context and increasing diversity in our interview panels to really drive that forward. Internally, our campus team go through a process of contextual interviewing. We have 15 employee networks within BlackRock, and 50% of all of our employees are part of an employee network, which then again allows us to kind of create more diverse talent pools and essentially generate more candidates through those networks. And I think some of the other key things are really just around inclusion dialogues. So 90% of all of our directors and managing directors have attended an inclusion dialogue, which is about behaviors in the workplace, microaggressions, how to be better allies, and really how to kind of, really thinking about allyship and inclusion. And then the final thing for us is quarterly business reviews. So each business has a quarterly business review whereby we look at things like gender, attrition, promotions, headcount, and the progress that each business is making on a quarterly basis.
Wonderful, thank you. Super comprehensive, lots of things. Hopefully you're kind of noting down or taking the ones that seem most pertinent to you. Caroline, you, like myself, see this from obviously the other side of the fence, externally. What have been the biggest challenges from your perspectives in running truly inclusive search processes for your clients?
Thank you, Upi. So to set the scene a little, I'm the founding director of Halsey, Keetch, which is an executive search firm servicing only financial services, but working in a really specific way in functions known as governance, regulatory and controls functions. So compliance, risk, audit and finance are our sole focus. So I guess we have the additional challenge when it comes to diversity of looking at heavily regulated functions within a heavily regulated industry at a fairly senior level. So every day is a challenge, every day is interesting. In terms of, before I answer that question, I think the reason that inclusion is so important it's something that we've always been aware of. I mean, a few years ago, a contact of mine in the industry said, for diversity to be the outcome, inclusion must be the act. And that's something that we all kind of know and we live and we breathe now. Back then, it was like a light bulb going off in my mind. So something that we thought about very seriously as a search firm was how do we run truly inclusive search processes? And we have a sort of two sides to that same coin. So we look at inclusive search processes as science and as an art. So the science is really thinking very hard about the process, about research, about talent mapping, about asking questions, about diversity, about data. Not that we actually, take data or collect data from our candidates in that way, but we do look at the talent map and we look at it through that lens. Then being very, very clear about what that means in terms of the shortlist and what that means in terms of a potential diverse hiring outcome, and asking our clients a lot of questions along the way. The art is about being inclusive, is about what inclusion means to us as a firm and how we embed that into our search processes. And actually, I could probably talk for about half an hour about the issues when it comes to running inclusive search processes, but to highlight two, time is one. So time is one area that I would really ask the industry to look hard at. And that's not just about running search processes quickly. That's about actually sometimes them taking too long. So it's looking at how does a search process work to support an inclusive hiring process and a potentially diverse hiring outcome. And if you're doing things too fast and you're not being thorough enough, that has obvious ramifications. Equally, if you're taking a very long time to get a search process to tick along, you're going to lose the attention of potentially really rare candidates who have a lot of these attributes when it comes to being right for the role, and you're going to really make it harder for that outcome to be a positive one. I think the other thing I would say is about communication. So we often find that there's a really great determination to be inclusive and to run things in a really thorough way from the outset. But as a search process unfolds, sometimes there are stakeholders involved in the interview process who aren't briefed, I suppose, on the initial stages of that hire, the rationale behind it, the talent mapping, the pressures when it came to shortlisting, potential lack of diverse candidates along the way, who may come and find somebody who's like a needle in a haystack in an interview and say no for a reason that perhaps doesn't relate to that bigger piece. So I'd look at those two things, time and communication, and a lot more, but those are my
I know, we could have this conversation for a really long time. Yeah. We have had this conversation for a really long time, but I think that those are really, really important things to be thinking about, and really that attention, right, and that's needed to keep this as kind of the lens throughout, but actually it shouldn't be an additional kind of lens. It should be actually integral to the way that the business operates. Like, inclusion shouldn't be an add-on. I'm waiting for the point where we don't have heads of D&I, because actually it should just be how a business runs. There shouldn't be specialist firms like ours that are focused on creating more inclusive kind of processes, because actually that's just how all firms should run. Okay, lovely. And Hannah, welcome to the panel. So Fidelity runs many hiring initiatives to ensure they have as diverse a talent pool as possible. And you've recently launched the Talent Marketplace and recently been promoted to head of such the talent place. Can you share how that's helping to drive more diversity and inclusion?
Absolutely. So as Upi mentioned, I'm Hannah, I work at Fidelity. I'm part of the global talent team, focusing on the WPFH pillar, if you're aware of that. But in terms of the talent marketplace, we actually launched this in June this year. Before that, I was at HSBC, where we also launched this talent marketplace. And just in case you haven't heard about what a talent marketplace is, it's a skills-based AI platform that matches employees to opportunities. So what that means is, when you think about all of the different things you can do to grow your career, so taking on stretch opportunities, finding mentors, doing more learning, this platform basically helps to connect individuals to whatever learning they decide to do to help them get to that next stage. So in talent, we talk a lot about the 70-20-10 model. So we believe that 70% of learning is through kind of on-the-job experience, getting really practical. So through the talent marketplace, employees can actually go on a stretch project or, work with a team, whether it's job shadowing, whether it's learning a new skill, whether they've learned a new skill and want to put it into practice, they're able to actually see opportunities which are directly related to them and the skills that they have, as well as the skills that they aspire to have in the future. The 20% we believe is linked to learning from others. So again, on the talent marketplace, you can actually go on there and find mentors which have the skills that you want to gain. So moving away from finding a mentor just because that person is the most senior person in the organization that you can kind of get a hold of, but actually this person is really good when it comes to influencing, or this person is really good when it comes to presenting. I want to find out how they do it, if they have any top tips, etc. So again, taking out the complexity of that mentoring relationship, where it gets kind of awkward. You've been speaking for over 6 months, you're not really getting anything from it, you don't know how to turn it off. So more in the moment when you need it, mentoring. So that could be one conversation, it could be 6 conversations, but it's from the point of view of gaining a particular skill or gaining an insight into something. And then the 10%, which is more formal learning, is an integration that we have at the moment with our LinkedIn learning platform. So again, you can put skills into the platform and say, these are the skills that I want to learn. And then it takes you through to LinkedIn Learning, where again, you can see the exact courses that you need to get that skill, as opposed to just lots of random learning. So the reason I talk about the talent marketplace and how it relates to diversity and inclusion is because everyone knows that, it's sometimes when you're working in certain organizations, it's really about who you know, it's about your network. And so the same people get tapped again and again to go on these stretch projects or are introduced to these mentors. But actually with the talent marketplace, the AI is kind of surfacing these opportunities to a different range of people. So you've got people who are posting their projects on there thinking, we don't have anyone in the organization with these skills. But then actually it's finding someone in a completely random team who has those skills and is able to help them with their project. So it's widening their view of the world in terms of who has the skills that they could utilize in their team. And it's also given those people an opportunity to meet a whole different range of people. It's allowing golden threads, it's allowing that interconnectivity that actually makes the organization a lot more efficient. So it's democratizing talent, it's democratizing opportunities, and actually where a project owner is consistently seeing lots of different people being relevant for their project and is still deciding to go with the same type of people that they normally go for, it then takes out unconscious bias, because everybody sometimes, not everybody, but a lot of people hide behind unconscious bias. I didn't realize I was doing it, but actually, if you can now see that I'm always going for these types of people, it then brings it to the forefront of why am I not giving other people a chance?
I think it's really important, and it's such a great way to look at it. And actually the future of the workplace is learning cultures and the continual learning, and understanding that actually sometimes we can get complacent and we can be in apathy zones. And actually what we really want to do is make sure that the talent is constantly developing, and that's exactly the right way. I'm going to plug it again, but Embrace Your Career Toolkit. This is so in line with why, because actually we are looking at trying to democratize that information for ethnically diverse people in the industry. And it's the same thing, so that we get more opportunities, we create communities, and there is definitely diminishing returns from like a mentor-mentee relationship, which hopefully you're overcoming. I think it's fascinating. I wanted to just ask, I know we've got a whole session on data in a moment with Matt and the importance of data, but I just wanted to get your steer. I'm going to come to you first, Jinder. So how important is it for you to collect data and set goals to build more diverse, inclusive organizations?
I think it's absolutely essential. We know that what gets measured gets seen.
Yeah.
So BlackRock, we've started a Count Me In campaign that's now gone into other European countries where we're legally able to collect the data. And we've seen some very good equitable interventions for our campus team. And I think just capturing that data allows you to gather momentum, and it allows you to consistently measure.
Wonderful, thank you. Hannah, I'm going to come to you. Same question.
I think data is important. I think anyone who says it isn't is probably lying. I do think it's important, and at Fidelity, again, we ask employees to voluntarily and confidentially give us some of that diversity data so that we can actually put things in place to improve whatever we have at the moment. But I also feel that sometimes organizations hide a bit behind data. I think sometimes you look at your teams and you can see it's not very diverse, and that could be, everyone on your team has maybe gone to uni, or everyone is, very samey.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't really need the data to tell you what's obvious, Maybe you only have one black person in your whole senior management team of over 250 people. You don't really need the data to tell you that. You just need to do something different. So I think it's good to have the data, but it's the actions that really matter. And it's good to be diverse, and sometimes it is seen as a bit of a tick box, but inclusion, again, is where you really get the value, because otherwise you're just continuously hiring people in and they're constantly leaving because they don't feel like they can be themselves, they don't feel like they have a community. And we can talk about microaggressions and things like that, but it comes down to the core of why are you collecting the data, what do you really want to do with it, and what data points are really impactful.
I think that's really important. Like, we need to make sure we're collecting the right data and then we're making the right measures to connect that data. Because I say this often, but if you have a cut on your leg, you don't put the plaster on your arm. So it's about making sure you know actually where you need to be in that. I've lost my clicker, so I don't know where it is, but if someone could turn to the next slide for me. All the way to the end. Go ahead, go on. Okay, finally, if you could give any advice, so I want your top 2 tips, one great place to start and another that's a game changer, that anyone from any of the organizations in the room, the 100 organizations, can implement right away to see material change, what would they be? So I want a place to start and a game changer. Let me come to you first, Caroline.
Yeah, fabulous. So again, from the perspective of a search firm looking at the industry and working with clients across the industry, I would ask clients to really engage with their recruitment, whether it's a contingency recruitment firm, if they're going externally, or a fully retained search partner, to get under the skin of what that provider is going to do for them when it comes to inclusion and diversity. There are a lot of brochures out there. There are a lot of great websites out there. Most of them say good stuff. And if you don't have that as your starting point, then I don't think many people get a foot in the door when it comes to pitching for some of this work. But this is really important work. And I really believe that questions should go beyond that, beneath that. So I would encourage an organisation who is thinking of looking externally or using a supplier to sit down with that supplier and just have a human conversation. Say, what does inclusion and diversity mean to you? What does it mean to your firm? Give us some examples of good work, by all means, but also what does it mean to you? And who's going to be running this assignment? What individual is going to be running this assignment? And then have a conversation with that individual about what inclusion, diversity means to them, how they will run the process, how they will treat people, how they will ensure that things don't go wrong, or if things do go wrong, how they will deal with them. That's really, really important, because this is a human thing. This is a human experience. As you said, diversity, inclusion, belonging. So that should be done. Do you want me to go on to the next one?
If we can have the slide to the next point as well. Thank you.
And then my game changer, again, I could list a few. And this was an accidental thing, actually, that's happened a couple of times in searches that we've been mandated against since the pandemic, where there's been a lot of Zoom activity and less sitting around a table. And what ended up happening was our client would sort of appoint somebody, normally someone from a talent acquisition side of things, who's our client there, who's just really excellent at working as an accidental inclusion ally. And it kind of gave me this idea that it would be a brilliant thing for organizations to consider whether they're hiring using their internal talent acquisition teams, whether they're using a recruitment agency or a search firm. Think, because there's someone that we could appoint who really understands this from the perspective of our firm, who can have a little conversation every now and then with our search partner to say, how's it going? What are you doing? The things that you said that you were going to do at the beginning, are you doing them now? If not, why not? And also to speak to the internal stakeholders if things aren't going well. So as a search firm, occasionally something's not quite happening that was supposed to happen, and having a sort of neutral point of contact has made such a difference. And it really has been the difference between a search process going a little off track and being really excellently handled, that's something that I think is a bit of a game changer.
I think it's a definite game changer, and I'm definitely going to be recommending that to my clients too. So thank you for sharing that. And if I come to you, Jinder, can you share your where to start and your game changer?
So I think where to start is to collect data and set goals, right? So for us, I mean, just in terms of data, in EMEA year to date, we made 1,043 hires with 48% gender diversity. In terms of game changers, I think it's really about embedding DEI into everything that you do, right? It might be a mindset shift, it might be a big change, but that's absolutely imperative. And I think diversity, equity, and inclusion go together. Diversity has been invited to the party.
Yeah.
Inclusion is being asked to dance, and then belonging is being able to do your best moves on the dance floor without the fear of being judged.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you. We'll be doing some of that later. And Hannah, finally.
Yeah, I think where to start, I said a complete a comprehensive evaluation of your workforce. And when I say that, I know a lot of organisations do kind of your voice surveys. At Fidelity, we've recently done our EVP, and it's all about feel fidelity. So our employee surveys feel heard. And this is where we really understand how the organisation is feeling about different things. So, but where I would say we could go a step further with the where to start is, when you have, even if you have great statistics, like 85% of your workforce, really feel like they're included, I would say you can go a step further by saying, how about those 15%, Instead of saying, that's great, pat on the back, it's more, what are we doing to find out about the people who still haven't said that actually they feel included? So doing things like, skip level meetings, or actually looking for people in your organisation who you feel may be feeling othered and having conversations with them. I think sometimes we speak to the same people over and over again and we get an impression of what we think the organisation is, but actually expanding your networks to hear about different experiences. I know when the whole George Floyd thing happened, for example, there were lots of meetings with Black colleagues to understand, but before that, there probably weren't many, and actually now there probably aren't many either. It's like a concentrated activity. So again, some people found those conversations so enlightening to find out what it was like as a Black person within an organisation. So I think taking that a step further, and when you get your results as a leader, instead of saying, this is great, it's over 70%, really think about that 30% and why they're feeling that way and what interventions could be put in place to help you get that to 100. And in terms of game changers, I've said put your money where your mouth is, quite bold, but I do think that, what you reward people for is what ends up being the culture of your organisation. So if you're rewarding people just for hitting those top sales or hitting those targets, etc., no matter how they do it, then that's how people will behave in order to get rewarded. So if inclusion and diversity and belonging and equity and everything else that we've been talking about is important, then there must be a way to reward those people who are going the extra mile to actually make that a reality in your organisations.
I think that's a really, really salient point, because it's gone beyond a nice to have. It's a business imperative right now that we take this really seriously. So thank you, everyone. That's our panel. We have a little bit of time for maybe some questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
I think we've got a couple.
Do we have questions there? We have questions down there.
There's one up there as well. I saw someone.
Perfect. I think someone's... Is there a...
Thank you. So I look after an organisation that focuses around neurodivergent applicants and candidates. There's a recruitment agency that focuses on that area. The key struggle for us is not in the initial processes, it's when we get to what we call the push comes to shove process, when someone actually makes a decision. So the question is, how do you influence, obviously, people within the business around, I suppose, the range of sort of diversity anyway, and obviously in our instance, neurodiversity, to have that level of understanding to make the right decision at that point?
Does anyone want to take that? I can share something. I think it's really important that we all recognise that we all have different thinking styles and we have different ways of processing information, and some of us may be more reflective. And I think it's actually, for your kind of challenge there, is about working with the clients that you work with, or the organisations, understanding actually we need to train whoever is touch point with that candidate and through their kind of cycle and kind of interview process and beyond, what do we need to be mindful of? What do we need to do? So I think there's this training that doesn't happen. And I started off as a recruiter 16 years in the industry, 16 years ago. And I know that I probably have been dismissive of people because they didn't have the same way of processing information in a quick enough time as I did. And I kind of like probably disregarded them. And now I look back and go, whoa, what did I miss there? And I think it's that reflection point and some of us taking that space to have those little ahas and go, what am I missing? What do I need to learn? So I think it's a process of maybe, since you're a specialist in that space, working with organizations to go, what else do we need to be thinking about? What else can we be making sure we put into the process to make sure it's as fair as possible for everyone, and people aren't kind of judged unfairly. So I think there's that learning curve that needs to happen, and also for organizations to take onus on themselves to go, what do we need to build in? How do we create more inclusive processes for every single person throughout? Because, you know, we can get stuck on kind of the minutiae when it comes to diversity, but actually we all have kind of elements of kind of difference from each other that we need to be more thoughtful of. Does anybody else want to add anything else?
No, I don't think so, but I think there's a question directed specifically at me.
Can you read it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So the question is, Jinder, your 50% employee take-up, are they active members? Do they attend an event and that counts? If they're all active members, how have you managed to engage this high level of participation? We struggle as a firm to get members for our business resource group, so any tips would be great. So with all of our employee networks, we have a specific program. So each network has a HR and a talent acquisition advisor aligned to them. So in some cases, the TA person or the HR person might dual hat. And our role is to act as an enabler, right? So we have access to things like an employer brand team, internal networks, and really act as that connector and give the networks a framework as to how to elevate what they're doing, whether that's LGBT Great, whether that was last year for Black History Month, and really making sure that we're talking about some of this stuff and giving the groups the tools and the framework to be able to do this.
Wonderful. Do we have any more questions? We have time for probably one more. Go ahead.
Hello again. I have a question. My name is Shanta Martin. One of the questions I want to ask the panel is, of the time span that you've been in your job roles, I don't know how long, looking back, what's one of the biggest things that you've learned when hiring or building a diverse team? And if you could do all over again, what would you implement differently?
Oh, wow. Existential crisis question over here. Who wants to take that first?
I think
Hannah?
I'll go first
Yeah?
because my answer will probably be the most basic. So for me, I can't talk so much from the hiring side, but I can talk about when there have been diverse teams. I can talk about kind of how that lands and how they developed and the difficulties with that. So I think sometimes we focus so much on getting diverse people in that we don't spend as much time really talking about what that means in reality.
Yeah.
I've spoken to managers who say, I'm all up for a diverse team, but actually it's really difficult. You know, it's much easier to talk to the same kind of people and not have to flex your tone and not have to, you know, change anything from the way that you've normally done it before. So, you know, I've got a consulting background where if you had kids, for example, and you wanted to leave at a certain time to be able to pick up your kids, it was like no one else is doing that, so you always feel othered.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen teams where actually before they used to have an all-male team, now that they have, you know, a woman in the team challenging some things, it's like really difficult because they're trying to manage how they managed before, but they need to change their style. So I think in terms of what I would change, I think it's about getting the people in the organization ready for the diversity and actually some tips on how to actually be an effective leader and how to bring people into the conversation. I know we were speaking before about people who've joined organizations where on their website it's like, we want everybody, please come, whatever.
Yeah.
And then they come in and it's little things like, you know, leaving for lunch. Like I was saying, you know, the people who were in the team before kind of just get up and go. And then you've got this person who's sitting there, no one's inviting them for lunch, and it seems really silly. You're not going to go to your HR person and say, no one is inviting me to lunch, so I'm leaving. But it's something that then plays on their mind, and it's like, I'm not accepted here, nobody likes me, and it impacts their work. So I think, to your point, in terms of what I would change, it's it's just about getting the people on the ground ready for the change and really talking in reality about what that's going to look like moving forward.
Can I add one tiny
Please,
thing? 'Cause I know we're
please.
nearly out of time. I think in terms of what I would change, I think the beauty of this debate is that it's, you know, it's not, I mean, I know we talk about a destination, but the journey is where you learn stuff.
Yeah.
And for me, it genuinely is a case of the more I know, the less I think I know. And, you know, that encourages more curiosity, that encourages more debate. I think dropping defences around this conversation and always encouraging people to ask difficult things is so important. A lot of the time people are using the wrong language, but they're not meaning it to do it. And actually feeling really stuck about things like that can really make a massive obstacle that doesn't need to be there. So I think it really is a case of like being part of communities like this where you can have a conversation, not feel defensive, be curious, ask questions, keep learning, and realise that you're never going to get to the end. And that's kind of the beauty of it.
Yeah. And I also think, just picking up on what you said, it's about maybe not looking back and learning and being critical, but not looking back and regressing and kind of going, okay, how do we build better forward? I think is probably more impactful rather than what would I change. It would be actually, what can I do now I know what I know? I think is really important. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our panel. The rest of the questions have gone, so apologies if you wanted to ask a question. I can't even see them anyway because I haven't got my glasses on, but thank you all. I hope that was a useful conversation. If you want to speak to any of us afterwards, please feel free to do that. We'll be hanging about, but thank you very much.